Today we are going to be doing a set review for Zendikar Rising. This will also include talking about the commander decks, but I'm going to start with just the normal set review. So I'm not going to talk about all the cards, but I will try to briefly touch on most cards that are relevant. So I feel like the general category of set reviews is a little bit washed out, and I don't really know exactly what my solution to that is. I'll leave a link in the description where you can see all the new cards and another link where you can see all the reprints. So if you want to see the less notable cards, then you can do that. Alright, so let's get into it. Angel of Destiny. 3 white for a 2/6 with flying and double strike. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each gain that much life. At the beginning of your end step, if you have at least 15 life more than your starting life total, each player Angel of Destiny attacked this turn loses the game. So, first of all, this can be really good with cloning effects because it can attack multiple people. Second of all, basically this means each player gains that much life, so your opponent won't actually be taking any damage. Their life will not be going lower. Your life will just be going higher. So think of it as instead of dealing damage, you are gaining life. And third of all, this is good with combats, extra combat steps. Archon of Emeria is 2 and a white for 2/3, flying. Each player can't cast more than one spell each turn, and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So this is good because it's just a stacks piece. In a deck that cares about stacks pieces, this is good. Archpriest of Iona is a white for an X2. Archpriest of Iona's power is equal to the number of creatures in your party. Your party consists of up to 1 each of Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, and Wizard. Rules clarification, parties, if you have a changeling or something that is multiple of those types, for that thing that is multiple of those types, you will get to choose which of the things it classifies as. So basically, it will only count as one, not all of them. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. It's okay. I mean, personally, I think for the party mechanic, it's not that great. Because the only way that it's playable for 99% of these cards is if you have a full or close to full party. You have to consistently be able to get a lot of the creatures within the party. Meaning you have to build around it. And with these cards, it's just difficult, not really worth it, and they don't synergize that great if you do build around them. So I don't like it that much, but maybe it'll work. Another card, so maybe I should get into the mechanics, but you know what? I'll just talk about them when they come up. Alright, so a cycle of cards. So there are basically 2 similar cycles. So I'm going to start with a monocolored land cycle, and they enter the battlefield tapped unless you pay 3 life. And on the other side is a 7-mana spell, 4 and I think it's 4 and 3 of a color, where you get some effect. So one example of this would be, which side is it technically? So I'm not sure which one it technically is, Emeria's Call or Emeria's Shattered Skyclave, but it's one of those, and when it enters the battlefield, you may pay life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, so it's a land. So you can choose when you play/cast it, depending on if it's land or if it's a spell. You can choose to either play it as a land, or you can choose to cast it as a sorcery. 4 white for a sorcery. Create 2 4/4 white angel warrior creature tokens with flying. Non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until your next turn. So I think this is a great cycle because it's just a way to give extra versatility to your lands. If you're in a deck with a lot of lands, such as a landfall deck, or if you just like playing it safe, this is a great way to add utility. And even if you are running a little low on lands, then if you have an effect you care about on one of these spells, then that's great. You can just put it in, right? You're adding another spell without taking away a land, and that is incredibly useful and if any of these are powerful, then they're just instant staples. There's also a similar cycle of those lands where they just enter tapped and tap for the white mana. They're also cheaper spells. So there's a similar cycle. We'll see some of those soon. Alright, Felidar Retreat, 3 and a white for an enchantment. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token. Or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. This is fine. This is useful. I mean, it's good. I mean, landfall plus these things, they're not necessarily going to synergize that well, but it is just good value. Alright, next up is the next cycle I was talking about. So, you can choose to either have it enter as a land that can tap for a white and enters tapped, or you can play Kabira Takedown. The other side is called Kabira Plateau. Kabira Takedown is 1 and a white for an instant. Kabira Takedown deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target creature or planeswalker. So it's just removal. It's alright. Next up is Legion Angel. Legion Angel is 2 white for a 4/3 with flying. When Legion Angel enters the battlefield, you may reveal a card you own named Legion Angel from outside the game and put it into your hand. So in Commander, this effect does not work. You cannot get a card from outside of the game. Because there are no sideboards in Commander, which is typically what that phrase would mean, it doesn't work and you can't get something from outside the game. So, therefore, in Commander, this is pretty bad. In other formats, we'll have to see. I know there are a lot of cards that do allow you to get stuff from searching through your deck, or, just things that will replace themselves with a copy of themselves that have been played, but it being 4 mana changes that, but it being a good value flying creature also changes that. So I don't know whether this will see play. I think we'll just have to see. I mean, I'm sure people are already brewing with it, but I don't know. I'm not as in tune with other formats as I am with Commander. Alright, Luminarch Aspirant is 1 and a white for a 1/1. Creature, Human Cleric. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This is good. I mean, it's not the best thing in the world, but it definitely has good utility. So, if you're in a deck that cares about +1/+1 counters, then this could just get you a lot of value over time. Mckindy Stampede is 3 white for sorcery. Creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. And on the other side, it has Mckindy Mesas, which is a land, and it enters tapped, and you can tap it for white. Mckindy Stampede is actually, in my opinion, extremely powerful. In a deck that is a token deck, this could be your win con. Having that option of either being a land in the early game or late game, likely winning you the game. This is an incredibly powerful card at all points in the game. I mean, I wouldn't call a tapped land incredibly powerful, but you get the point. These types of cards are incredibly important in token decks, or decks that make a lot of creatures. And running too many of them or having duplicates of them can be annoying. And it can also be very annoying to get them early in the game. This solves that problem, so I think it's going to be incredibly useful. Alright, Maul of the Skyclaves is 2 and a white for an artifact equipment. When Maul of the Skyclaves enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and first strike. This is pretty good. I mean, I don't mess with equipments that much, but I do think this will be very useful in a lot of decks. +2/+2 flying and first strike for just 3 mana is quite good. But if it doesn't stay on there, having to pay 2 white to equip it again is kind of pricey. Alright, Undo Inversion is 6 white for sorcery. Destroy all non-land permanents. And on the other side is a land, Undo Sky Ruins. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for white. So, I've said this before, but you can choose which side to cast it. I don't know how I feel about this, honestly. It being 8 mana is a lot. I wouldn't say most, a significant portion of Commander games, you will never be able to cast this. But if you are able to cast this, unless you're winning, in which case it's fine to not have the utility of a single card. I mean, that's up to debate, but you get the point. Unless you're winning, you're gonna want to cast this spell, because you have 8 mana, so other people probably also have a lot of mana. So, I don't know. I mean, it being a land is a very redeeming quality, but it entering tapped and only tapping for 1 mana doesn't really help it that much. So, the other side, I don't know how much you're going to be able to use that. But if you have a lot of ramp, then I could see it being good. Alright, next up is Sagiri Shelter. 1 and white for an instant. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. And on the other side, it has Sagiri Glacier. Again, you can choose which side, and it enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for white. So we are seeing a lot of cards that will just give us something, a free spell almost. I mean, for the cost of replacing a plains with a tapped land, we get the option to have this free spell. Now, I don't know whether I should read these all because they are good. You know, like, having that land just makes them so good. But they're also not good. You know, like, is it really worth it? I mean, this card in particular could go in a Replicate deck. It could go in a Zada with white, some multicolor Zada deck or something, right? There's a lot of different things, a lot of utilities these cards have. So, I don't know. I mean, it just depends on the deck, but having to make such a small sacrifice means it's very easy to include it. Alright, Skyclave Apparition. 1 white for 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with CMC 4 or less. And when it leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner creates an XX blue illusion creature token where X is the converted mana cost of the exiled card. So, first notable thing, you can do the sacrifice outlet trick where when it enters the battlefield, you put the exile trigger on the stack, then you sacrifice it, it will leave the battlefield, they'll make a 0/0, and then you'll get to exile something. So, that can be useful. Second of all, it seems pretty decent. I mean, not the best card in the world, not the worst card in the world. CMC 4 or less makes it kinda bad, but I don't know. I think we'll see. I don't think it'll see widespread gameplay, but it might be seen some places. Skyclave Cleric is 1 and white for 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. It's a land on the other side, so I don't think this one in particular is actually worth it. In really any deck. I mean, maybe there's something, but this just doesn't give us value. So, maybe I'm wrong, but I just think these do have a price. I mean, at the beginning I was thinking maybe it's not that much, but it is there, and you definitely don't want to overdo it. Alright, Squad Commander is 3 and a white for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white warrior creature token for each creature in your party. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. Okay, sorry, I misread that. Squad Commander. When Squad Commander enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white core creature token for each creature in your party. Not at the beginning of combat, that would be insane. So, this is interesting, right? It itself is a ward. So, you know you're going to get at least 1. And if you have a full party, it's insane, right? Every single creature you control, including it, gets +1/+0 and indestructible. That is just very, very powerful. So, I don't know. Maybe you can build around parties, but it just seems very inconsistent. Alright, next up. Not really exactly a white card, but we'll talk about it anyway. Tazri, Beacon of Unity. 4 and a white for a 4/6. Legendary creature, human warrior. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. 2 2 hybrid blue, 2 hybrid black, 2 hybrid red, 2 hybrid green. So basically what those 2 hybrid whatever, basically you can choose to either pay 2 or a blue, 2 or a black, 2 or a green, 2 or a red. And then you can have this ability. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, and or Ally cards from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, where does this go? I think that it's as it's intended. If you want to build this in an ally deck, it could work, but in my opinion, General Tazri does a much better job. Or if you wanted to build this in the way they intend it as a party deck. This is built around having a full party. First of all, it's a warrior, so you already get one thing full. Second of all, it gets cheaper. Third of all, you get to find more. You get to find more cards within your party. And you're 5 colors, so you're not missing out on very much. Alright, so that is white out of the way. Let's see how we're doing on time. 17 minutes. We're definitely behind. We'll see what happens. Alright, next up. So, honestly, I'm gonna skip over some of these tapped lands. Like, they're good, right? But they're just not that good. So, I'm gonna skip over some of them. If they're good, I will say them. Alright, Sharix, I have no idea how to say that. Sharix, I'm gonna go with the Raging Isle. 2 blue for a 0/17. Spells your opponents cast that target Sharix, the Raging Isle, cost 2 more to cast. And it has 3. Sharix gets +X, -X until end of turn, where X is the number of islands you control. So, this is interesting. So, the first thing that comes into my head is, do we have anything within these colors that will basically make its power the toughness? And we have some ways to do it, but it's very difficult and there's not very many great options. So, that is a way to do it, but it's not the best thing in the world. So, then what if we look at the way they want us to do it? Islands. We want like 16, 15, something like that. Not necessarily a 16-1. That's a little bit overkill. Let's say we want like 5 toughness or something. We want 12 islands. But we're in mono blue, and we definitely do have some island ramp in mono blue, like 1 or 2 cards, but that's not enough. So what are we gonna do? I don't really know what the best solution for this is. I think it's just a generic mono blue Voltron command. Not that there's very many of those. I think you build it like any other Voltron commander. Put tons and tons of equipment on it that are useful. Now, you can activate this ability twice, which then you can move into, reducing the cost of activated abilities. That could work too. But I think you just put lots and lots of equipment on it, and as a bonus, you can use that mana ability. Deal some more damage. That way, it'll be bigger. You can hit that 21 if you have enough islands. I don't know. I mean, we'll see, but it having built-in protection, makes it pretty decent. But considering that the built-in protection is the spells only costing 2 more to cast, I don't think that's the best protection, because most removal spells are below 3 mana. And considering Sharix is 4 mana, that's going to protect it, best case scenario, 1 turn, which with this commander in particular is not enough. So, I don't know. Let's move on. Confounding Conundrum is 1 and a white for an enchantment. When Confounding Conundrum enters the battlefield, draw a card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player had another land enter the battlefield under their control this turn, they return a land they control to its owner's hand. So that sounds a little complicated. Basically, when it enters, draw a card. If a land enters on an opponent's control, if that opponent has already had a land enter before, like on that turn, then they're going to return a land of their choice to their hand. So, I mean, that's I mean, it's a stacks piece to hate on. Landfall, trying to cast multiple lands in a turn decks, but I don't know how good this is. I mean, how commonly is this gonna work past when you cast it, right? Because a lot of land ramp cards are CMC2. So, first of all, you're just gonna lose not half the utility, but a lot of utility from it being CMC2. So, I don't really know. How many land spells are instant speed? Not very many. It could be useful. I don't really know. I think it has to be tested. Plus, people might get mad. They might categorize it as land destruction, which I don't think that's I'd say that's not really a reasonable claim, but that's not really my choice. Alright, well, I don't know about that one. It could be good, it could be bad. Maybe I'll try and analyze it. Coralheim Chronicler is 2 and a blue for 2/2. Whenever you cast a kick spell, draw a card, then discard a card. When Coralheim Chronicler enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a card with a kicker ability from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, kicker, right? There are a lot of cards with kicker in here. I glossed over a lot of them just because kicker is kind of not that great. But this is a good card, a good example, and there have been cards in the past with kicker. So, I don't know. I mean, being able to get a kicker spell is good, and being able to cycle through your deck after casting them is also nice, but I just don't see the archetype. Like, there's that red-green commander from a while ago that would work with kicker, and that was a good deck, but it wasn't even necessarily building around kicker. It was more of a +1/+1 counter deck, trying to focus on getting as many +1/+1 counters as you could onto the commander. So, I don't really know. Plus, that's also not in blue. So, maybe there is a good deck somewhere, but I don't really know exactly how it would work. Maybe I'll try it. Maybe I'll try and put it together. Okay, next is Glasspool Mimic. 2 and a blue for a creature, Shapeshifter Rogue. You may have Glasspool Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature you control, except it's a Shapeshifter Rogue in addition to its other types. I completely nailed this one, sort of. So, first of all, on the other side, it has a land and enters the battlefield tapped. When I was talking about Mark Rosewater's spoilers, I'll leave a link in the description to that episode. I predicted Shapeshifter Rogue, right? He said that was going to be one of the creature types. I said, this is going to be a clone, and it's going to maintain its creature type. That's what I said, and I was completely right. And this is so much more powerful than I expected. It being 3 mana for a clone by itself is actually incredibly powerful. I mean, it maintaining its creature type is a little bit weird, but I would say it's good. So, I think this is incredibly powerful. 3 mana for a clone by itself is very good, and having the option to also instead put a land down makes it even better. So, I don't know. I mean, we will see, but I will definitely be putting this in my Tazrizada ally Blink thing deck. I'll leave a link in the description to my deck for that also. So, yeah, I mean, this is incredibly good in my opinion. Alright, Inscription of Insight. 3 and a blue for sorcery. Kicker, 2 blue. Choose one. If this spell was kicked, choose any number instead. The options are return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. So you can do your own. Scry 2, then draw 2 cards. Target player creates an XX blue illusion creature token where X is the number of cards in their hand. Alright, so let's go through these. 3 and a blue. If we just cast it and we get 1. Returning up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. Not great value, but it is good utility. Scry 2, then draw 2 cards. Same thing, you could get that for 3 mana. Not great value, but it is good utility. I mean, could you get that for 3 mana? Only in black, I think. Target player creates an XX blue illusion creature token where X is the number of cards in their hand. In niche cases, that would be quite good, but most of the time it wouldn't. Alright, so what if we do them all at the same time? Return up to two target creatures to their owner's hands. Keep in mind, this is 8 mana. That's useful, and then you get to scry 2, then draw 2, and then you get to make that XX. So that XX is going to be 2 bigger than it was before. But you are casting this out of your hand, and it's turn 8, so you've been playing a lot of lands and ramp or whatever. So I don't know how I feel about this. I don't think it's very good, but no, I don't think it has utility. I mean, I'd say maybe in a specific deck, but none of these deck abilities are niche. They're just kind of good stuff, except that they're not particularly powerful. So I don't think this has great utility, but maybe I'm wrong. Alright, Jace, Mirror Mage. 1 blue for a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Jace. It has kicker 2. And when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create a legendary token that's a copy of Jace, except it's not create a token of Jace, except it's not legendary, and its starting loyalty is 1. So it has a +1 scry 2, and it has a 0 draw a card and reveal it. Remove a number of loyalty counters equal to that card's converted mana cost from Jace. So, I don't know. I mean, if you cast it for 3 mana, then you're getting 4 loyalty, and you'll get to draw a couple cards off of it, scry 2, something like that. I mean, in most commander decks, I'd say most commander decks, the average converted mana cost is around 3. But that doesn't count lands. So maybe the actual average converted mana cost is somewhere close to 2. So on average with that one, you might get 2 hits from it. So I don't know. I mean, it seems okay, but it just doesn't seem that great. So maybe in a specific deck that cares about scry, I could see it being quite powerful. But if it doesn't care about scry, I don't think you should put it in. Alright, next up is LOL Mages Domination. X blue for a sorcery. This spell costs 3 less to cast if it targets a creature whose controller has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Gain control of target creature with converted mana cost X. I don't know. I mean, it costing 3 less, if it fits that, it's okay. I don't love it. I mean, nowadays you can get just a card that will take control of a creature for a 4 mana. Now, usually that would be like an equipment or something, aura, but I don't know. It doesn't seem that great to me. Maybe it could be, but I just think it's an expensive way to do it. Alright, Maddening Cacophony is 1 and a blue for a sorcery. Kicker, 3 and a blue. Each opponent mills 8 cards. If this spell was kicked, instead each opponent mills half their library rounded up. That is insane. So, first of all, the 2 mana each opponent mills 8 cards is quite powerful, honestly. That is 24 cards for 2 mana. That's really good. And then if you just want to get even more insane, you can pay 6 mana, only 6 mana, to make each opponent, not 1. This would be good if all it were 6 mana to mill 1 opponent. No, this is 6 mana to mill each opponent by half of their library, and it's rounded up. So, with cards that will double the amount milled, especially the commander that does that, you can just instantly get all your opponents to not have libraries anymore. That is incredibly powerful, especially because it's rounded up. That's really good. Alright, Master of Winds. 2 blue for 1/4. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards and discard a card. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery or wizard spell, you may have Master of Wind's base power become 4/1 or 1/4 until end of turn. It seems kind of bad. I mean, 4 mana, and you get to draw 2 and then discard. That's nice, but it's just, I kind of expect it to be a 4/4. Then it might be okay, but even then, doesn't seem that great. So, I mean, we'll see, but I just don't think it's great. Not that useful. Alright, Merfolk Falconer is 3 blue for a 4/4. Whenever you cast a kick spell, scry 2. I mean, there's some use. I mean, there's a lot of things like this. Whenever you cast a kick spell, you can get some utility, but I'm just not seeing the deck. Maybe it'll be there. Maybe it'll pull together. Alright, next is Nimble Trap Finder. 1 and a blue for a 2/1. It can't be blocked if you had another cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard enter the battlefield under your control this turn. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, creatures you control gain. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card until end of turn. So this is the issue I was talking about earlier. Basically, if you are not playing a party deck, then you're not going to consistently be able to have a full party, so this just isn't useful. There are a lot of decks that really care about that whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card effect, but because you're not going to have a full party, it doesn't matter. But if you are playing a full party, deck, then, I mean, this is over it. You know, like, you're gonna have creatures, and you're gonna be attacking with them, and it'll be nice to get cards, but you're just not taking full advantage of this. It being 2 mana is really nice, though. Alright, then there is Seagate, I skipped over something. Ruin Crab. Blue for creature crab. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 3 cards. They are doing this a lot. They are turning basically older cards into new cards that say each opponent mills. It just makes it significantly more powerful. And it being landfall makes it free for you. So this is going to be incredibly good and give you a lot of value to mill decks. I think this set has made mill an even more powerful archetype. Alright, I mean, in the past, mill was sort of powerful with specific commanders, but not generally. I think this could make a lot more commanders viable for mill. Alright, Seagate Restoration. 4 blue, so 7 mana. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. And on the other side, it has a land. It enters tapped unless you pay 3 life. And you can tap it for blue. So it seems okay. I mean, 7 mana, drawing the number of cards in your hand can be useful in a deck that cares about it, like maybe a Locust God deck, but that's a lot of mana. So I don't really know. I mean, it could work, it could also not work. Alright, Seagate Storm color is 1 and a blue for 2/1. Kicker, 4 and a blue. When Seagate Storm color enters the battlefield, copy the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn when you cast it. If Seagate Oracle was kicked, next instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 2 or less you cast this turn when you cast it. If it was kicked, copy that spell twice instead. You may choose new targets for the copies. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think this is bad. Basically, it having to be CMC 2 or less just makes it kind of bad. If you cast it for the normal version, then you get to copy it once, and, you get a small amount of value. But with it being CMC 2 or less, you're just not going to get that much. The best cheaper cards are removal, and those have diminishing returns. And then, if you want to kick it, well, you're talking about 8 or 9 mana. So, first of all, that's a lot of mana, so you're going to want to win the game for that effect. And it doesn't really solve the problem. It being cast 3 times doesn't really make it that much better. I think the utility for this is flicker, right? Being able to flicker it and then get the next flicker spell copied is just gonna make it very useful. So, I don't know. I mean, I could see playing this. I don't think I would, but it definitely would have a utility in a couple decks of mine. Well, one deck, but whatever. Alright, Selundi's Vision is 2 and a blue for an instant. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And on the other side, it's a tapped blue land. Okay. It seems maybe okay if they're in a deck that has a lot of instants and sorceries, but not the best. Alright, Thieving Skydiver. 1 and a blue for 2/1. Kicker X. When Thiever, X cannot be 0, by the way. When Thieving Skydiver enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, gain control of target artifact with CMC X or less. If that artifact is an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. This is insanely powerful. First of all, it's X or less, so it includes cards that are the same as X. Second of all, if you just cast it for 1, you can steal Soul Rings, you can steal Moxen, not the OG Moxen, other Moxen. You can steal so many incredibly powerful things with this. Artifacts are some of the most powerful cards in Magic. So, this is going to be incredibly useful. Especially with that equipment thing, if you can take swords and such things, that can be incredibly, incredibly powerful. Or it can just be mediocre. Alright, next, so we're on to black. So next up is Agadeem's Awakening. X black, black, black for a sorcery. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that each have a different converted mana cost, X or less. So, it also has, on the other side, it's a land that can tap for black, and it can either enter the battlefield tapped, or you can pay 3 life for it to enter untapped. So, I don't know. I mean, it seems... I don't know, honestly. In order for this to be good, you have to cast it for, I don't know, maybe like 4 or 5, maybe 6 mana, and hit most of those different thresholds. They have to have a different converted mana cost. So unlike most X spells, you can't just go extremely high and get tons and tons of value. I mean, there's not really any... You're not really going to get any new cards past CMC like 9 or so, depending on the deck, of course. So, I don't know. I mean, it seems like in the best case scenario it could work, but that's not really going to happen very much. But then again, on the other side, it is a land, so it's really hard to say it's just unplayable because it never really is. You know, having that land is a little sad, but it's not, the worst thing. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to rag on the cards that are like that, but they are heavily nerfed because of that. But then some of them also aren't. We will see. I don't think that one in particular is very good. Alright, Coveted Prize is 4 and a black for sorcery. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. If you have a full party, you may cast a spell with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So, I don't know. Seems kind of bad. Think about it this way. Seemed kind of bad in a non-party deck. 5 mana for a tutor is just not, it's not good. That's not really a question. The question is, how is it in party decks? Well, I don't really know. I mean, it's all about how consistently you can get your party. If you can get that party when you're casting it, it is insane. It is a single black for a tutor through your library to put it into your hand. That by itself would be really good. I mean, obviously you have to have the party, so that makes it less good, but you get the point. Then, if you have the full party, so you can cast a spell with CMC 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. That is absurd if you have the party. But how much are you going to have that? And if you don't have the party, say you have 1 say you have 2 or 3 cards, it's still good. I mean, if you have 3, it is basically a demonic tutor, which is very, very good. And if you have 2, it's a better Grim tutor. So, I think this is good. I mean, in a party deck, you should be able to have that 2 or 3. In which case, it's a very, very good tutor. And in a very rare scenario, you will have 4, and it will just be insane. So I think that's very powerful. But it is inconsistent, which consistency is very important in tutors. So, I don't know. Drana, the Last Blood Chief. So a new Drana is 3 black for a 4/4, and it has flying. It's a legendary creature, by the way. When Drana, the Last Blood Chief, attacks, defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard. You return that card to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. The creature is a vampire in addition to its other types. So, I don't know. I mean, they get to pick a card out of your graveyard. It's very conflicting. So, first of all, non-legendary, that's fine. You just don't include that many legendaries in the deck. Second part that's really conflicting is you want to have a lot of cards in your graveyard so this can be used over and over again, and so you can get lucky and get that good card that you want. But you also want to have a very small amount of cards in your graveyard so that you can control what your opponent is picking. So I think maybe the best solution to this is Graveyard Hate, but use it on yourself. So if there's some cards you can use to exile specific cards, it only really has to be creatures out of your graveyard. Then you can mill until you hit what you want, and then get rid of everything that you don't want your opponents to pick. Now, this does require constant sources of mill, which can be hard to make sustainable, but maybe that could work, maybe it couldn't. I don't know. That's just my take on it. Alright, next is... what is next? Hagra Maulin. 2 black for an instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast if an opponent controls no basic lands. Destroy target creature. And on the other side, it has a tapped land that can tap for a black. By tapped, I mean it enters the battlefield tapped. So, as a baseline, honestly, I think this is good. 4 mana to be able to just instant speed destroy a creature and get a tapped land as an alternative isn't bad. I mean, I wouldn't say you'd play it, but it's not like you'd never ever consider playing it, you know? Like, it's decent. And then if an opponent controls no basic lands, this totally depends on your meta, first of all. Budget and all that stuff. But I think that's quite good. I mean, I feel like that's fairly common. Not like the most common thing in the world, but I think it happens a good amount of time. Alright, next up, Inscription of Ruin is 2 and a black for sorcery. Kicker, 2 black. Choose one. If this spell was kicked, choose any number instead. The options are: target opponent discards 2 cards, return target creature with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I am turning off my phone. So, basically, if we just think about it, so for the 2 mana, for the 3 mana version, if we play it without kicking it, it's okay. I mean, discarding 2 cards can be very useful in a specific deck, but I don't think that's that great. Returning a card is not great, and destroying a creature is good in specific scenarios, but really not that good. So what if we kick it? I mean, if we don't kick it, I think it's kind of bad, but if we could have utility for that discard 2 cards, it could be definitely playable. If we do kick it, then it's 7 mana, target opponent discards 2 cards, somewhat useful. The returning of the creature, not that useful, but might have some niche benefits. And destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. So, I don't think that's great either. I think maybe in a deck that could have a good use for that, target opponent discards 2 cards and would consider playing it, just for 3 mana, target opponent discards 2 cards, then it could definitely have good utility. But other than that, I don't think it's that good. Alright, next up is Malachi Rebirth. Instant, choose target creature, you lose 2 life. Until end of turn, that creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. And it's a land on the other side. It's tapped, and you can tap it for black. It's alright. I mean, it's not the best thing in the world, not the worst thing in the world. Protection's nice, land's nice. If you can just hold this up, and maybe eventually you'll use the land, maybe eventually you'll use the protection. I think that's pretty good, pretty useful. Also, it dying and then returning back can be nice. Alright, next is Marauding Blight Priest. 2 and a black for 3/2. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. This is good. In a lot of decks, such as Soul Sisters and things. This could definitely go in my Aura deck, by the way. This was not spoiled when I made the deck list. In a lot of Soul Sisters decks that will just get triggers after triggers, tons and tons and tons of triggers of just life. Over and over and over. If you are just getting tons and tons of triggers of gaining life over and over and over again, this could be very useful. If not, it's pretty bad. Alright, next up is Nighthawk Scavenger. 1 black for a 1/X. Flying Death Touch Lifelink Vampire Rogue. And, 1/X3. Nighthawk Scavenger's power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. So, I don't know. I mean, in a mill deck, that's the best spot for this. Which, this is very conflicting. So, the best spot for this is either in a mill deck or an aggro deck. In a mill deck, it can be incredibly powerful, incredibly consistently. But the issue with that is you don't care about that damage as much. I mean, being able to get that lifelink is nice, but having a big power creature isn't that important to you. Okay, but what about in an aggro deck? Well, in an aggro deck, that damage is important to you. And there's a lot of opponents that will just give you those things in the graveyards. They'll mill your opponents maybe. They'll mill themselves. Whatever it is, that's incredibly common. But that's dependent on what your opponent does. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's an aggro mill deck that's gonna, build around this, but I'm not sure what the solution is or how this can work. Because the payoff for the work you're doing isn't the payoff that you want. I don't know. I mean, it seems incredibly powerful, but it also seems difficult to build around well. Alright, Null Priest of Oblivion is 1 and a black for 2/1, with kicker 2, 3 and a black, menace and lifelink. So, 2 mana, 2/1, menace, lifelink, not that great. And if you kick it, 6 mana, because it's 3 and a black, plus the 1 and a black. When it enters, if it was kicked, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Recursion's nice, not necessarily the most useful thing ever, but definitely has good value. And having a 2/1 menace lifelink, not great, as I said before, but it could be useful in a lot of decks. Okay, next is Palaka Predation. 2 and a black for sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a card with it. You choose a card from it with converted mana cost 2 or greater. That player discards that card. 3 or greater. And it has a land that can enter tapped and tap for a black. Seems kind of bad. I mean, 3 or greater is not very many cards. Depends on the format, but a lot of decks, such as in Commander, you're probably not going to care that much about the discard. In other formats, there's not going to be that many cards with CMC 3 or greater. Plus, it's 3 mana, so not that great, especially because in other formats, you're going to care a lot more about that tapped land. Alright, Scourge of the Skyclaves. 1 and a black for an XX. When you cast this spell, if it was kicked, it has kicker 4 and a black. Each opponent loses half their life rounded up. and its power and toughness are each equal to 20 minus the highest life total among players. So, I don't know. There are a lot of decks that can benefit a lot, especially in like Rakdos and stuff, from everybody losing a lot of life. But that's not the most common thing, and it's difficult, you know? Like, you lose a lot of life doing this, and your opponents have to be really low, and everyone has to be really low in order for this to be good at attacking, you know? Plus, I mean, there's a pretty high chance this isn't just going to be able to one-shot your opponents, which means you're just going to be sitting there with most likely 3 opponents all trying to kill you when you can't even one-shot them. You know, like, you've got like 3 turns, probably like 6 turns or something, you know, until you can actually kill them. So, I don't know what the solution is. I mean, it's okay, and it definitely does have utility, but it's just a little awkward, a little difficult to use and make it work properly. But maybe you just use it as a sorcery. 7 mana to get everyone to lose half their life isn't bad and could have a really, like, a game-winning effect on a lot of decks. So, we'll see. I think it will definitely see a lot of play. Well, not a lot, but it will see play in the decks it's built for, which is good, you know. That's the way it should be. Alright, Shadow's Verdict is 3 black for sorcery. Exile all creatures and planeswalkers with CMC 3 or less from the battlefield, and all creature and planeswalker cards with CMC 3 or less from all graveyards. I don't know. I mean, if you are in a deck that has a lot of large CMC creatures and planeswalkers and stuff, then that's good, right? I mean, in a planeswalker deck, being able to get rid of that stuff, there's not going to be that many planeswalkers with CMC 3 or less. Or in a deck that just doesn't have very many small things or very many small things you care about, or all the small things are ramped, so you won't care about them when you're casting this. There's a lot of niches that this could work in, but your opponents are still going to have things. This is not a wrath. This is a value spell. It's not going to affect you very much, but it will do some damage to your opponents. By damage, I don't mean actual damage. I mean, it will make it more difficult for them to do things. So, I don't know. I mean, it seems okay. Skyclave Shade. 1 and a black for a 3/1. Kicker, 2 and a black. Skyclave Shade can't block. And if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if Skyclave Shade is in your graveyard and it's your turn, you may cast it from your graveyard this turn. So the kicker seems honestly really expensive and kind of useless, but the landfall ability and being able to cast it over and over again is incredibly useful, in my opinion. I think it's great to just be able to have some cards you can just cast over and over and over again for very little cost or, you know, like very little effort. Alright, next up is Soul Shatter. 2 and a black for an instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest CMC among creatures and planeswalkers they control. I don't know. I mean, it's okay. You could get utility out of it. If you're in a deck that cares about and runs a lot of cards that will just have everyone sacrificing creatures, then this could be incredibly useful. But a lot of these decks are sacrificing creatures for the effects of 1 high CMC creature. So I could definitely see this having good utility, but I could also see this sacrificing the biggest thing on your board. So you'll have to take a very careful look at your deck and see what the payoffs for the sacrifices are, whether they're creatures, and if sacrificing, and whether you'd likely sacrifice them because they're high CMC. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see about that one. I don't think it's going to see that much play, but in the decks it does, it will be quite good. Alright, Tabarax, Hope's Desire. 2 and a black for 2/2 with flying. Tabarax, Hope's Desire, has lifelink as long as it has 5 or more +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Tabarax. If that creature was a cleric, you may draw a card. If you do, you lose a life. So, clerics are quite good. like this is a good deck for clerics. I mean, you can sacrifice them and bring it back over and over and over again, and this could go very well in an aura deck. Aura will be, I'll talk about that later, but basically it's just a commander that focuses on clerics and bringing them in and out, over and over and over again. So this is incredibly powerful in that deck, and it's incredibly powerful, as its own cleric commander. It's just quite good as a cleric commander in general. Anything related to clerics, this will be involved with. Alright, so now we are on to red. So Ardent Electromancer is 2 and a red for a 3/2 creature human wizard. When Ardent Electromancer enters the battlefield, add red for each creature in your party. Your party consists of up to 1 each of cleric, rogue, warrior, and or wizard. So it is a wizard, so you're going to get at least 1. And if you're lucky, you'll get 3, so it'll be free. And if you're extremely lucky, you'll get 4, and it'll be an anthem. Who knows? Seems okay. If you care about having that creature, which if you're in a party deck, you will, because it's a part of your party. All right. Next up is, what is next up? Wow, I'm just getting a chunk of not that great cards. All right. Kazul's Fury is Fling. Fling is basically this effect. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sack a creature. Kazul's Fury deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. But Fling is 2 mana, Kazul's Fury is 3 mana, they are both instants. And on the other side, it's a land that enters battlefield tapped. In any deck that cares about Fling, it'll go there. Simple enough. Kargan Intimidator. 1 and a red for 3/1, cowards can't block warriors. 1. Choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. Kargan Intimidator gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Target creature becomes a coward until end of turn. Target warrior gains trample until end of turn. So, first of all, you can stop things from blocking Kargan Intimidator. Second of all, you can make it bigger. Third of all, you can give it trample. And if you have lots of warriors, you can get extra utility from these same abilities. Seems alright. It definitely could be useful in an aggro deck. Not the best thing in the world, though. Alright, Leyline Tyrant is 2 red for a 4/4 with flying. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. This could be incredibly useful and good to just get value. And when Leyline Tyrant dies, you may pay any amount of red. When you do, it deals that much damage to any target. With that combination of abilities, it is not difficult to get into a state where there's nothing your opponent can do about you winning. Yes, there are ways around it, but if you get it set up so that if they don't do anything, they will just slowly die from being beaten down by a 4/4 flyer, and they will lose. Or if they do something and kill it, then you will pay tons of red mana and just kill them on the spot. So they're just in a really difficult situation, and there are some ways out of it, of course, but it's just quite difficult. Alright, Magmatic Channeler is 1 in red for 1/3. As long as there are 4 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, it gets +3/+1. And tap, discard a card. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Then choose one of them. You may play that card this turn. So being able to filter through the top of your library is nice, not the best thing in the world. And being able to get a 4/4 for 2 mana is also quite nice. But you have to have 4 or more instants, so that's pretty niche. Definitely could be useful in some specific decks, and most decks. Morag, Fury of Akum, I'm not sure how exactly you pronounce that, is 4 red for a 6/6 legendary creature Minotaur Warrior. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it has attacked this turn. So you can use multiple combat phases to make creatures attack multiple times. And it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. This is incredibly powerful. As its own commander, you can just get tons and tons of lands and just go over and over and over again and cast and play those lands with extra land effects and stuff and just get so many, attack phases and have tons and tons of creatures benefiting from it. There's a lot of different things and ways you could take advantage of this. And if you're playing this not as the commander, I could also see it slotting into a lot of 99s. A lot of landfall decks will just incidentally create creatures. Think of Avenger of Zendikar. So there's a lot of different ways you can get creatures, and this could be an incredibly good way to win with them. Being able to attack over and over again can be quite good. This could also work with a lot of different combos that will give you tons or infinite attack phases, but, that's not too much extra. And also, it attacking for the first time, it will just get benefited, so it's not going to be nothing if you just manage to not get any benefit. Alright, so next up is Relic Robber. 2 and a red for 2/2. Haste. When Relic Robber deals combat damage to a player, that player creates a 0/1 colorless goblin construct artifact creature token with this creature can't block, and at the beginning of your upkeep, this creature deals 1 damage to you. I don't know. I mean, it's really a small effect, It dealing 1 damage to you each upkeep will definitely add up, and you being able to attack them over and over again is nice, but they are likely to be able to sacrifice it or take advantage of that 0/1. So, I don't know. It could definitely be useful, but it could also backfire. So, we'll have to see, but if you just choose who you're attacking carefully, and you're able to get through consistently, then that's nice. Plus, it being a goblin, the creature, or the creature you give them, not sure if you could take advantage of the creature you give them being a goblin, but this creature being a goblin, it's easy to take advantage of. Alright, Roiling Vortex. 1 and a red for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Roiling Vortex deals 1 damage to them. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Roiling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. And red, your opponents can't gain life this turn. I don't know. I mean, there aren't too many decks that try and gain a lot of life. You might get some utility off of that, not too much. Being able to deal 1 damage to players every single upkeep could be very useful for, triggers and stuff, but I don't think it's that great. Plus, it will deal damage to you, and players casting a spell without mana being spent is somewhat common. Could definitely be very useful, but also might just never happen. So I think it could have good value and good usage over a game, but most of the time it'll just be mediocre or not that great. Next is Shatterskull Charger. 1 red for 4/3 with kicker 2. Trample, haste. If Shatterskull Charger was kicked, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. And at the beginning of your end step, if Shatterskull Charger doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it, return it to its owner's hand. My understanding of this is, in Commander, not that great. In Standard, with an Ember Cleave, this could be very powerful. I don't really know too much about Standard, but that does seem quite good. Being able to have a 5/4 for 5 mana, and then stick a +1/+1 counter on it, a +1/+1 from Ember Cleave, and then giving it double strike and all that stuff. You would definitely be able to kill quite quickly with that. So it seems very good and viable to me, but I don't know that much. Alright, Shatterskull Smashing is X red for sorcery. It deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, Shatterskull Smashing deals twice X damage divided as you choose among them instead. I don't know. It honestly doesn't seem that great. On the other side, you have a tapped land that you can pay 3 life for it to enter untapped. It doesn't seem that great. I mean, being able to get rid of creatures is nice, but paying 6 or more is quite a lot of mana. That would be 8 mana. And paying less than that, you're not really going to be able to get rid of very much. So it seems like an expensive, not really great removal to me. Alright, Song Mad Treachery is 3 red for sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. and on the other side it has a tapped land that can tap for red. So being able to steal creatures is nice, not the best thing in the world. Could definitely be useful in a lot of decks and a lot of situations, but 5 mana is a lot for that effect. Tuk Tuk Rebel Fort is 2 and a red for a 0/3 creature wall with Defender and Reach. Creatures you control have haste. Haste is incredibly useful in a lot of decks, and this could be a very good way to do it. Especially because it's a common, it will most likely be cheap to acquire, and good in a lot of decks that, as I said before, care about haste. Valakut Awakening is 2 and a red for an instant. Put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library. Then draw that many cards +1. Okay, so in a lot of decks, I think this is incredibly useful, but you have to be careful. In a lot of the decks, this will be useful, but in a lot, it won't. You have to be able to take advantage of drawing those cards. And obviously on the other side, well, not obviously, actually, I didn't say anything about it. On the other side, it has a land that can tap for red and enters tapped. I think in a lot of decks, if you can take advantage of drawing those cards, this will be incredibly powerful. If you can't, it might be playable, but it also might not. So we will see. Alright, Valakut Exploration is 2 and a red for an enchantment with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. And at the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with Valakut Exploration, put them into their owner's graveyard. Then Valakut Exploration deals that much damage to each opponent. Seems okay. I mean, it doesn't seem that great. What are we talking about? I mean, being able to deal like 1 damage per turn isn't that great. If you can get a lot of landfall triggers, that's good. I mean, playing it means you can get lands. I don't know. I mean, it seems like in landfall decks, where you could get a lot of triggers on it, you can get more lands, and you can get, other cards that will get you more lands and things like that. That could be useful. But it also could just not, like, if you just don't get very lucky on it, it dealing 1 damage to each opponent isn't that great. So I think it'll be useful in the decks it's put in and see a good amount of play, but you have to be careful with it because the floor on it is quite low. Alright, Wayward Guide Beast is red for 2/2 with trample and haste. Whenever Wayward Guide Beast deals combat damage to a player, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Now, this might seem quite bad. I mean, red for 2/2 with trample and haste is quite a lot of damage, especially really early on. But if you don't care about that being returned, or you're in a format other than Commander, I'm not going to really touch on that. But in Commander, if the returning of that card to your hand is an upside, then that's not really an issue, A lot of decks will want it to be returned to your hand, so you can just cast it again and get landfall triggers, stuff like that. That could be an upside. And having some damage early on isn't really a bad thing. It's not the best thing, but it's not a bad thing either. Alright, next up is Ancient Green Warden. 4 green for a 5/7 with reach. You may play land cards from your graveyard. So, on a 6 mana creature, that ability is good, but not the best thing in the world. The thing that makes it incredibly powerful is if a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. I'm just going to go straight into Magical Christmas Land here. So say we're talking about a Yarok deck. So this will double all, enter the battlefield triggers. Then, let's say on that Yarok deck, we have this Ancient Green Warden. And then, you know what, let's just make it even spicier. We have a Panharmonicon. So that means that we will get 8 triggers every single time that a landfall trigger happens. That is insane. There's just so many triggers. Like in a Yarok deck, having 4 triggers for every single one, if you get this, is absurd. That is so many. And being able to play lands from your graveyard is just more. It just gets out of control insanely quickly. I think that's going to be incredibly powerful. Alright, Ashaya, Soul of the World. 3 green green for an XX. Ashaya, Legendary Creature Elemental. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. And non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. So, I don't know. I mean, in this scenario, we're talking about every single creature that's not a token and every single land you control is its power. I don't think having the highest power is necessarily that beneficial. So Ashaya is going to allow you to basically, the main benefit of it, since we don't care too much about the power and toughness boost, is making my non-token creatures into also forests. So this is just going to allow us to get a lot of ramp and also take advantage of a lot of different things. So I think this will be very useful and could be incredibly powerful in a lot of situations, but it's not like insanely broken or anything. But it could be extremely powerful in a lot of situations. Alright, Balaged Recovery is 2 and a green for a sorcery. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. And on the other side, it has a land. It's just you can tap it for a green, and it enters tapped. I think this is incredibly powerful. In Commander decks, it's important to have some recursion. Nowadays, that is usually Eternal Witness, Regrowth, which is just 1 and a green for this effect, and I think this is a good addition to that list. It is also a land, so you're really not sacrificing that much by including it. So, again, it's not really the greatest list. I'd love to have a larger list of cards that I'd include as recursion in my decks, but there just isn't the greatest selections. So, I think this is great to add to that list. Alright, next is Cragplate Baloth. 5 green for a 6/6. Kicker, 2 and a green. This spell can't be countered. Hexproof, haste. If Cragplate Baloth was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. This is honestly kind of bad. 7 mana, 6/6 Hexproof haste that can't be countered. It's nice to have protection, but that doesn't make it good. And if you make it 10 mana for a 10/10, that doesn't really fix the problem. So, that's just not really useful. Alright, Inscription of Abundance is 1 and a green for an instant. Kicker, 2 and a green. Choose 1. If this spell was kicked, choose any number instead. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Target player gains X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures they control, and target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. Now, this is the only reasonably priced one. So, for 2 mana or for 5 mana. Now, if you cast it for 2 mana, I think the fight ability is useful. It's not a great rate for it. You can get it for cheaper, but it's not a horrible rate for it either. The gaining X life isn't great, but might have utility. And the +1/+1 counters is very rarely will have utility, but it's going to be a very weak way of doing it. But if you cast it for 5 mana, I mean, it's not that great. 2 +1/+1 counters, gaining some life, and fighting is nice. The +1/+1 counters do synergize with the fighting and the gaining the life quite nicely, but I don't know. I mean, it's okay. It's not horrible, but it just isn't particularly powerful in either of the situations. If you care about fighting, I could see it as a very good card. Alright, Iridescent Hornbeetle is 4 and a green for creature insect. At the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each +1/+1 counter you put on creatures under your control this turn. Now, this is a little bit conflicting. Like, what are we trying to do? Do we want lots of creatures, or do we want to put +1/+1 counters on our creatures? Because I feel like you kind of have to pick which. There's a couple cards that will put +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. But other than that, there's not very many cards You know what? No, I'm wrong. There are a lot of cards that focus on getting +1/+1 counters on a lot of your creatures. Think of Rishkar. This is actually quite good. I think this could be really, really powerful and interesting. I admit my fault. I don't know what I was thinking. This could be very good and useful in a lot of decks, especially Rishkar. Alright, Kazandu Mammoth is 1 green for a 3/3. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, Kazandu Mammoth gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And it's a tapped land on the other side. It's kind of bad. But it being a land makes it, decent. Next up, let's see. Next up is Oran Reef Ooze. 2 and a green for 2/2. When Oran Reef Ooze enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And when it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. I don't know. I mean, this could be very good if you have a lot of creatures that already have +1/+1 counters on it. But, how difficult is that to do? I think it can be good, but it is a little bit niche. Roiling Regrowth is 2 and a green for an instant. Sacrifice a land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. If you're familiar with Harrow, this is the same as that, except for 2 differences. Harrow has them enter the battlefield untapped, whereas this has them enter tapped. So this is slightly worse. And Harrow has the sacrificing a land as an additional cost to cast the spell, whereas this has it on resolution to cast the spell. So if Harrow gets countered, you will still sacrifice the land, whereas if this gets countered, Roiling Regrowth, you will not sacrifice the land. Overall, I'd say Roiling Regrowth is definitely slightly worse, but they do both have their downsides and upsides. In most decks that have Harrow, this will also be good. Alright, Scoot Swarm is 2 and a green for 1/1. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. I've seen mixed reviews, but in my opinion, this is incredibly powerful. So here's the argument on both sides. It's not really a debate of whether when you get 6 lands, you're going to make a copy of Scoot Swarm, and you're just going to make copies and copies and copies, and it's going to get insane. The issue is how difficult it is to get to that point, and whether landfall and token creation go together. So I think that landfall and token creation sort of go together. They're not, it's not necessarily the same archetype, but I do think there is a lot of, synergy built in with that archetype, with tokens and landfall. And as of the second question, how difficult it is to get to 6 lands, usually I'd say that's incredibly difficult and makes this a little bit niche and hard to use. But that's wrong. The entire focus of your deck is getting lands onto the field. Getting 6 lands is easy. So you're just going to be able to keep on doing this over and over and over again relatively early in the game. I think this is going to be incredibly powerful and very useful in a lot of decks. I think it's going to be great. But we'll see. Maybe it'll be too slow. Because you're going to need a couple, first land you have 2 Scoot Swarms. Second land you have 4. Third land you have 8. At that point it's just insane, and it just gets crazier from there. So will you be able to get 3 lands? I think you will. But maybe you'll have burnt out all your abilities by the time you get to 6 lands. I guess we'll see. I think it's going to be incredibly powerful though. Alright, Swarm Shambler. Green for a 0/0, and it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. 1 tap, put a +1/+1 counter on Swarm Shambler. Okay, my opinion on this is meh. It's all dependent on your opponents, right? By itself, it's just green for a 1/1, right? And you can add more +1/+1 counters. Now, in a deck like Rishkar or something, if you're acceptable of just having green for a 1/0/0 with a +1/+1 counter on it, then that's fine. Go for it. Put it in your deck. But if you're not, then just don't put it in the deck. Like, sure, you might get a 1/1 every once in a while, but it's not really gonna make a huge difference. And I just don't think it's really, gonna be a huge factor. So if you're in a deck like Rishkar or something that's okay with just having a 0/0 with a +1/+1 counter on it, then go for it. Alright, Tajuru Paragon is 1 and a green for 3/2. It is also a cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. So you can choose, so it's good in party decks because it can be, whichever part of your party you're missing. Alright, and it has kicker 3. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a card that shares a creature type with it from among them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is incredibly good because, first of all, it is a part of your party. Second of all, you get another part of your party. And third of all, you're probably going to have some other parts of your party already. So this is great to, fill out your party. Oh, yeah. Alright, next is Tangled Flora Hedron. 1 and a green for a 1/1. Tap it for green. And on the other side, it's a land, and it enters the battlefield tapped. So if you've got plenty of lands, you can just play it as ramp, and if you don't, you can play it as a land. I think this is interesting. I mean, I don't really know. It's definitely an interesting take on ramp, and if you don't have enough lands, you don't need to play it, but if you have a lot, then you can ramp up and just get some momentum. So I think this will be good, but it's not going to be like an instant staple or anything. So in decks that care about it, or like 2-mana ramp or something like that, it will definitely see play. Alright, Turn Timber Symbiosis is 4 green, green, green for sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. If that card has converted mana cost 3 or less, it enters with 3 additional +1/+1 counters on it. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, I don't know. On the other side, it has a land, and it can enter tapped, or you can pay 3 life and it'll enter untapped. So, you get to look at the top 7. That's a lot. It is 7 mana, though. And then you can put a creature from among them onto the battlefield. And if it has CMC 3 or less, it enters with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. So, I don't know. I don't think this is really worth it. For 7 mana, you could just replace that with an incredibly powerful creature, and it'd be usually better than what you'd get from that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think you should just play a powerful creature here, sorry, I had a hiccup, rather than, hoping you'll get one from the top. You can't get multiple, and getting +1/+1 counters on something is just probably worse than if you had just had the powerful card in the first place. Alright, and now we are on to multicolor. So, I'm just gonna, go through these now. Aki, Fearless Voyager, is 1 red-white for 3/3 legendary creature, core warrior. Whenever you attack a player with 1 or more equipped creatures, draw a card. So, I think this is interesting. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a good amount of red-white equipment commanders, but I think it's nice to still be able to attack, that's red-white's thing. You're still attacking, but you're also drawing cards. So you can attack and you can play all these things and just go for it. But if you just run out of fuel, or if you get ravved or something, you'll have something to come back on. You'll still have equipment. You'll still be able to cast more creatures. Things like that. You will have something to do if you just get screwed over. Alright, and Brushfire Elemental is red-green for a 1/1 with haste. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Has utility, not the best thing in the world. Cleric of Life's Bond is white-black for 2/2. Whenever another cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. And whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Clerics of Life's Bond. This is great in cleric decks, which I've touched on a good amount. And I mean, it's just, and it can get +1/+1 counters. It can be quite good. Grokmaw, Skyclave Ravager is 1 black-green for a 0/0. It enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, put a +1/+1 counter on Grokmaw. When Grokmaw dies, create an XX black and green Hydra creature token, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Grokmaw. Seems kind of bad, honestly. I mean, you get to kill a lot of creatures and stuff, and put +1/+1 counters on Grokmaw, and then you just get a big creature, which isn't that great, and then you can kill it, and then you get another big creature, which also isn't that great. I mean, you're just putting in a lot of work for really not very much payoff, especially because creating tokens is also, quite difficult to do. Doesn't seem like the greatest payoff. Maybe it'll work, but it just doesn't seem that efficient or effective. Alright, Kaza, Royal Chaser, is red-blue for a 1/2 flying haste legendary creature human wizard. Tap. The next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of wizards you control as this ability resolves. Wizards and Izzet and all that stuff have a lot of association with instants and sorceries. So I guess this is just another option for a wizard, instant, and sorcery tribal deck, and I think it could be interesting. I mean, having a lot of huge X spells, for example, or just a lot of huge spells in general, could be one way to take advantage of this so you could cast them super early. I don't really know exactly how you would do it, but I think it could make an interesting deck. Alright, Linvala, Shield of Seagate, is 1 blue-white for a 3/3 flying legendary creature, Angel Wizard. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, choose target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. Sacrifice Linvala. Choose Hexproof or Indestructible. Creatures you control gain that ability until end of turn. So, I don't know. I mean, you could have this as a second party deck, but I just don't think it's as good as Tazri. And I mean, having protection's great, but as a commander, it's not the most important thing. So, I don't know. I guess it's a party deck, but it just doesn't really help your theme. It just gives you a little bit extra benefit for doing your theme. Alright, next up is Nahiri, Era of the Ancients. 2 red-white for 4 loyalty, legendary planeswalker Nahiri. +1, create a 1/1 white core warrior creature token. You may attach an equipment you control to it. -2, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a warrior or equipment card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And -3, Nahiri, Heir of the Ancients, deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to twice the number of equipment you control. The +1's kinda bad. -2 is alright. I mean, getting cards into your hand is nice in Boros. And the -3 is just kinda bad. You're not gonna have that many equipment. So, I don't know. Overall, seems like not the greatest planeswalker, but it could definitely have utility. Alright, Nissa of Shadowed Bows. I actually talked about this earlier in a leak a long time ago. It is 2 black-green for a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Nissa. Landfall, whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, put a loyalty counter on Nissa of Shadowed Bows. +1, untap target land you control. You may have it become a 3/3 elemental with haste and menace until end of turn. It's still on land. And -5, you may put a creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or graveyard with 2 +1/+1 counters on. So, the +1 is nice. I mean, it's not really particularly powerful, but it's a little bit helpful to have. And the -5 can be very useful to be able to bring something back. But, I mean, considering it's the only particularly useful part of the card, paying 4 mana for it isn't the best thing. It's not the best use of your mana, so it's alright, but it's not a particularly powerful card. I mean, having landfall to get loyalty seems quite powerful, but the payoff just isn't quite there. Omnath, Locus of Creation, is the 4-color Omnath. I'm super hyped for the 5-color Omnath now. We'll see what that is. It is red, green, white, blue for a 4/4 legendary creature elemental. When Omnath, Locus of Creation, enters the battlefield, draw a card. And it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. If this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn, if it's the second time, add red, green, white, blue. If it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. So I could definitely see Omnath as a very powerful 4-color commander as an alternative and as a good landfall commander. It's just a way that you can get just about everything except for black within the landfall, you know. There's not too much else that cares about landfall in black. Alright, next up is Aura, Skyclave Hierophant. 2 white black for a 3/3 legendary creature core cleric with lifelink. Whenever Aura, Skyclave Hierophant, or another cleric you control dies, return target cleric with lesser converted mana cost from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is incredibly powerful, and I did an episode on it a while ago. So I'll leave a link in the description to the Aura deck tech, and, you know, hopefully you check it out if you want to build that deck. But other than that, I mean, it's alright. It's very good, and if you build around it carefully, it can be very good. But you have to be very careful with how you do build around it, because it's just hard to piece it together quite right. And I think I did a good job. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I don't know. I guess you'd have to test it out, which I did that episode on short notice. And there's a couple new cards that I actually did talk about in this episode that I did not include in there because I didn't know they existed yet. So that's the thing. Alright, Phylath World Sculptor is 4 red, green for a 5/5. When it enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each basic land you control. And landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put 4 +1/+1 counters on target plant you control. So, getting tons and tons of creatures when it enters is honestly the part I'd say you take advantage of. I don't know if this is necessarily a landfall deck. This could just be a better token deck. I don't know. I mean, being able to make tons and tons of plants is nice. But them being 0 power does make it a whole lot more difficult to take advantage of. So I guess we'll see. I think this could go either way. Could be a landfall deck, could be a token deck, but in either case, it's kind of outclassed. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the token in Gruul combo, but I'm pretty sure it is. Alright, so next up is Verazol, the Split Current. X, green, blue for a 0/0. Verazol, the Split Current, enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each mana spent to cast it. Whenever you cast a kicked spell, you may remove 2 +1/+1 counters from Verazol. If you do, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, at the end, this is gonna have to have, a lot of +1/+1 counters on it. At least 2 if you want to do it, once. But it seems expensive to cast. And then afterwards you have to cast a kicked spell. It seems to me like the best way is to either put +1/+1 counters on it some other way, or to just use something else entirely to, copy it. It's a commander, so it definitely does serve the role as a kicker commander, but we already have that in Gruul. So I'd like to have it in red, green, blue, which would be Teamer. So that'd probably be my preferred color combination, but I guess they're doing two color commanders. It seems alright. It functions in the role, but not incredibly powerful. Alright, Yasharn Implacable Earth is 2 green, white for a legendary creature Elemental Boar. When Yasharn enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic forest card and a basic plains card. Reveal those cards and put them into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents, cast spells, or activate abilities. So, I don't know. I mean, the second ability, it can be incredibly powerful. Think of fetch lands and all of these different things. It will be very, very good. Keep in mind, mana abilities are exempt from this, or maybe they're not. I don't know. Mana abilities have weird rules, so they may or may not be exempt from this. And being able to get lands to put into your hand is nice, but it doesn't really fill any archetype. I mean, you could say, oh yeah, play extra lands every turn archetype, but that's just a terrible idea. I mean, if you have too many cards that do that, you're just gonna, waste value. You don't want very many of those cards. There's very much a limit to how many you should play, because you only want one, basically. One card that says you can play an extra land every turn. Alright, Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats, is 4 red black for a 4/4. Legendary creature vampire rogue. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. And it has flying, death touch, and haste. Other creatures you control have death touch. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. So let's break this down. This is a lot of conflicting themes. So it costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. That is the only thing that it mentions about parties, and it is a rogue, so it could potentially have some synergy with a party deck, but I don't think Rakdos is a great color for that, and I also don't think this is a great commander for it. So it could work, but not necessarily best. Flying, Death Touch, Haste, nice abilities, not really pointing to a deck. You definitely can use those, especially Death Touch, for a deck, but we'll touch on that in a second. Other creatures you control have Death Touch, and whenever a creature you control deals damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. So that's what I think the deck is. I think it's a Death Touch deck, and there's a lot of different ways to take advantage of that. Maybe a pinger deck, maybe an evasion deck, whatever it is. There's a lot of ways to take advantage, but I think it's a pinger deck. It's like a Death Touch deck. We'll see. We'll see what people do with it. Zareth San, the Trickster. 3 blue-black for 4/4 with flash. 2 blue-black. Return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand. Put Zareth San, the Trickster, from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Whenever Zareth San deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So, I mean, being able to just use rogues and all that stuff, unblockable, all that stuff, it's a well-established, well, I wouldn't say well-established archetype. It's an archetype that is somewhat commonly played. I'm sorry, I'm really biased because I have a person in my meta that plays it a lot. So I'm just like, yeah, this is a super common, well-played archetype, but it's not. It's just in my meta, I'm used to it. That is a thing, like unblockable with rogues and, getting through and replacing and all that stuff that I can't remember the keywords names for, is an archetype. Alright, so that is all the multicolored cards, so now we are on to the colorless cards. Forsaken Monument is 5 for a legendary artifact. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. So this is very good in colorless decks. Giving colorless creatures +2/+2 is very good for 5 mana. That's pretty typical if that were the only thing on the spell. Doubling mana is also very powerful, and that extra 2 life for casting colorless spells is just a nice little bonus. So this will be good in colorless decks, but they're not very common, so this won't see too much play. Alright, Lithiform Engine is 4 for legendary artifact. 2, tap, copy target activated or triggered ability you control. you may choose new targets for the copy. 3. Tap, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. And 4. Tap, copy target permanent you control. That copy becomes a token. Sorry, a permanent spell. So the way that would work is while the spell is on the stack, if it's a permanent, you can copy it, and you'll get a copy. So you won't be able to do it while it's on the battlefield. Alright, so what's my take on this? I've heard a lot of different takes on this, and there are also some combos with it. But my opinion on it is it's not that great. It is very expensive for these abilities. I mean, 6 mana for copying an activated or triggered ability, or it's 7 mana for copying an instant or sorcery. All these things, you have to activate it many, many times in order for it to be worth it. And it just doesn't seem that great. If you can consistently use this as part of a combo engine, it's quite good. Or if you just have some really good synergy that makes it worth it, maybe it will be. But in the vast majority of cases, I don't think you're going to be able to activate this enough times for it to be good value. I mean, activating it 2 times makes it honestly still pretty bad. You'd have to activate this 3, maybe even 4 times for it to be even decent, which just isn't that likely and is incredibly mana intensive. So that's my take on it. I mean, it definitely could be good, and you don't necessarily want to rule it out, but it's not necessarily going to be. Myriad Construct is 4/4/4/4 with kicker 3. If Myriad Construct was kicked, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each non-basic lands your opponents control. And when Myriad Construct becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it and create a number of 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature tokens equal to its power. So, if we cast it for its baseline, then it's, a 4 mana 4/4, which is pretty bad, and if it gets removed, then you can get some constructs. The important part about this is it doesn't have to be an opponent's spell. So, for example, in something like a Zada deck where you can replicate and it can become a target of a spell very easily, then this can be a way to make tokens, especially because in that type of deck there are a lot of pump effects, although that wouldn't work particularly well because it would die before the spell resolved, so that would be problematic. Especially because in that type of deck, it would give you the tokens, and that type of deck often cares about having tokens. Alright, also for this first part, if it's kicked, so it would be 7 mana, which is quite a lot, and it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each non-basic land your opponents control. So that in Commander, I would say, would be quite a lot. This would be a very large creature, and a good way to make a lot of tokens. So in a deck that cares about tokens and cares about sacrifice, so maybe like a looping over and over again, maybe a Soul Sisters deck or something. Alright, next is Skyclave Relic. 3 for an artifact, kicker 3, indestructible. When Skyclave Relic enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 tapped tokens that are copies of Skyclave Relic. And you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. So if you don't kick it, it's a 3 mana rock that's indestructible and can tap to add 1 mana of any color. That is pretty good. It's definitely not one of the best mana rocks, but it definitely holds its own weight. Or if you do kick it for 6 mana, you get 3 of those. So 3 cards that can tap for 1 mana. And you'll get 1 of that mana back immediately because the original would enter untapped. So, I don't know. I think it's pretty good, but it is quite a lot of mana if you want to kick it. So in some decks, it would care about it, but in a lot of others, it would just be kind of bad. Alright, so then there's one more cycle. There's lands that enter the battlefield, and you can choose. You can choose which side you want to play it on. So you can either tap it for one color or tap it on the other color, deciding, depending on which side you choose. To clarify, one example would be Boulderloft Pathway. It's a land, and you can tap it for white. Or, when you play it, you can choose to play it as Branchloft Pathway. is a land, and you can tap it for green. So there are lots of examples of this, and there are 5 of these printed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 printed. That doesn't really make sense, so I must be confused. I don't know why there would be 6. I'm not sure if I'm confused or if they just decided to do 6. That's a little weird. But there are 6 of these, and why is it 6? Okay, I'm sorry. So there are 6 of these cards, and you can choose which side to play on it. In my opinion, these are extremely powerful. I would say that these are strictly better basic lands. And that's an issue. So basically, the difference between these and basic lands is these are not basics, so they can't be searched out of your deck, which in my opinion is almost never an issue. The only time it matters is if you are running out of a specific type of land, which in most decks isn't an issue. Maybe if you have a lot of colors, but that's 99% of the time not an issue. Or if you're just tutoring for tons and tons of lands. But in most decks, you're not going to have to worry about that. And the second time it would matter is non-existent. Like, if you have a forest, it's exactly the same if you search it out of your library. So then, if you're not searching from it out of your library, if you're getting it in your hand, what's the difference? Well, the difference is it's still not a basic, right? But these are better because you can choose whether you're going to need that green or whether you're going to need that white or whatever other 2 colors it would be. So these are better in that situation. The only downside is that if you have a card that cares about the number of basics you have or something similar, then you're not going to get that full value. But that's also extremely uncommon. So in my opinion, these are much better than basic lands, and therefore we'll see a lot of play. So anything that's just an upgrade, like you don't have to do anything, it's just better, we'll see a lot of play and become fairly expensive. These are also rares, so, we'll see. I think this is going to be incredibly powerful. All right, 2 more cards. Crawling Barrens is a land. You can tap it for colorless, or you can pay 4 and put 2 +1/+1 counters on Crawling Barrens. Then you may have it become a 0/0 elemental creature until end of turn. It's still a land. So, that's pretty good. Being able to put that +1/+1 counters on it can just be some decent value if you're in a colorless deck, or you can take advantage of it. There are a whole lot of decks that can take very good advantage of this and just get a ton of value. I can't really think of very many examples off the top of my head, but I just have heard so many examples of where this would fit very well. So just think about your decks and be like, does this synergize in some really awesome way? Alright, Throne of Mckindy is a land, and you can tap it for colorless, and you can pay 1 and tap it to put a charge counter on Throne of Mckindy. And then you can tap it and remove a charge counter from Throne of Mckindy to add 2 mana of any 1 color. Spend this mana only to cast kicked spells. My opinion on this is a little mixed. If you are in a kicker deck, you're not going to be in too many colors, either 2 or 3 colors. So, you're not going to care about the fixing, so you can make the sacrifice of having them. But it's not that great, using a mana and a turn of that just to get that 2 mana the next spell isn't really that great. So I could see it in a charge deck, a kicker deck, and you could get some value, but it's just not going to be that powerful. Alright, and for the last topics are the Zendikar Rising commander decks. So I will leave a link in the description to these, and I'm not going to go through them too much, but I would say these are pretty decent. These are like most other commander decks. You can just pull them out and you can play them. I wouldn't say these are as powerful as the last year, but they're coherent decks and they will function. They will work. So I think these are pretty cool, but there aren't very many new cards. So these decks, I think, function a semi-different role than the other previous commander decks. In other previous commander decks, it had a mixed role, right? You could either give it to a new player, have a new player buy it, whatever, and it could be their first deck. It could be how they get into commander, that type of thing. Or it could be, getting some good value cards, reprinting cards, printing new cards that are really interesting. But these decks, I think that they just decided, you know what? We are not going to do multiple goals. We are going to focus on one goal, getting a good playable deck to new players. And I think they did a really good job. My favorite thing about these decks is they are $20 a piece. You could buy 2 of them for $40. You could buy both for the price of the ones last year. So I think that is awesome. And I think that's going to be great for new players. $20 as an entrance is very, very different than $40. So I think this is awesome and is going to be great for entering players. And you can compete, right? There's not as much value or as many things in here, but there are things, and it's a well put together deck. So, I don't know. I mean, we will have to see, but I think this is a great way to get people into the format. I don't think it really matches on the other goals that we want, but that's not the purpose of this product. And, maybe you're like, well, you don't like the mindset of this product isn't for you. Every product should be for everyone. But I don't think that's true with some, I don't think that has to always be true. I don't think every product can, satisfy everyone. And if you can make some sacrifices and just focus on one group, then you can give them a really good product. And I don't like that for whales as much because that's not very many people. And that's not really making growth in the community. It's kind of killing it. It's making everything expensive. But with new players, I think that's okay. So also, a lot of the things that are focused and built around new players are just kind of trashy and scammy a little, honestly. So, I don't know. But there are also some new players, so new cards, so I'm going to read those off. There are only 6. So in the Land's Wrath deck, there is a new commander, Obun Moldiah Ancestor. It is 1 red, green, white for 3/3 legendary creature elf spirit. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature token, creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is Obun's power. It's still a land. And it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So it's a land deck that also focuses on getting some power on creatures and things like that, which is interesting. I mean, I don't think it's a great commander, but this is the one on the front, and it could work. I mean, it works fairly well, I don't think it's optimal or really that great of a way to utilize landfall, because that's not what landfall is taking advantage of, but it does the thing. Okay, Trove Warden is 2 white for 3/4 with vigilance. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. And when Trove Warden dies, put each permanent card exiled with it onto the battlefield under the control of that card's owner. So you can just get tons and tons of cards out when it dies. So it could be like a Wrath Deterrent or something. Or a way to get back after a Wrath if you have some way to kill it. Alright, next is Geode Rager. 4 red for 4/3 with first strike, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, goad each creature target player controls. Until your next turn, those creatures attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. So it's a 4/3, and it'll just goad lots of creatures. Every single creature is pretty nice. Goading is an interesting mechanic that can be fun to mess around with. But I don't know. I mean, goading is also a little weird to mess with. Like, is it really that great as just every deck, in every deck? I think it's nice utility, but not that great. Alright, and the next deck, Sneak Attack, also has 3 new cards. The commander on the face of the deck is Anawan, the Ruin Thief. 2 blue, black for 2/4. Other rogues you control get +1/+1. Whenever one or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If the player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you draw a card. So this way, it kind of focuses you on attacking multiple players, but enough focused at each player so you can get that creature, or at least be likely to get that creature. So, I don't know. I mean, rogues being unblockable and being able to get through is a good thing to take advantage of, but it doesn't really work as well on the try and get 1 creature through so you can replace it aspect. I mean, it does work, but it's just not really what it's pushing you towards. It's pushing you towards having a lot of rogues, which can work, and you can, do a lot of swapping, but a lot of the rogues have giant, effects when they deal combat damage. Alright, Enigma Thief is 5 blue for a 5/5 creature Sphinx rogue, and it has Prowl, 3 and a blue. You may cast a spell for its Prowl cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with a Sphinx or rogue, and it has flying. When Enigma Thief enters the battlefield, for each opponent, return up to 1 target non-land permanent that player's controls to its owner's hands. For 4 mana, this is amazing. For 7 mana, this is pretty bad. But if you can consistently get that cast for 4 mana, then it's pretty good. I mean, I do think it's nice to be able to get some stuff out of the way, like flyers and stuff, so you can deal damage more consistently. Alright, Whisper Steel Dagger is 2 and a black for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. And whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may cast a creature spell from that player's graveyard this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. So you want to deal combat damage, and then you can cast something out of their graveyard, which is, useful, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem that great. It's quite expensive to get onto a creature. You then have to deal combat damage, and your deck doesn't really care that much about, equipment. So this is alright, but, it's not the best thing in the world. Alright, well, that's all I have for you today. I mean, this is the deck. This is the set. I tried to go over everything, and I covered most of the important cards. I'd say all of the important cards. I will leave a link in the description to basically everything I referenced, unless I just completely forget and don't notice it all during editing. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But I will leave a link in the description to basically the Zendikar Rising Commander deck lists and a Scryfall link where you can see all the cards that are new. So I will also leave a link for all the cards that are reprints and a couple episodes that I've done in the past that I talked about earlier. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.